Today's story, my friends, is a tragic tale of a small family that had spent their years traveling throughout Japan. A family of 4 whose lives were devoted for the mere entertainment of small gatherings as puppeteers. The father of this family, a man who had spent years devoting his craft and life to puppeteering, had not only spent most of his life on the road after experiencing his greatest moment on stage, but a man who had never dwelled on the consequences of having his own family join him on his campaign, not realizing how he was depriving this family the chance of settling down in a home and live out their normal, mundane lives. It was because of this man and his selfish hopes to relive his experiences of performing his craft before thousands of spectators. His wife just could not support her husband's lifestyle after the 3rd pregnancy. Unlike her husband, the idea of raising 3 children on the road, sleeping in the back of a truck, and living off of whatever panhandling money they could gather from their shows, which wasn't very much. That was why she took off somewhere after giving birth to her 3rd child, Natsumi. Even after the mother left, life for this family wasn't easy, especially for Haruhiko. Unlike his brother, Yukihiko, Haruhiko did not have the enthusiasm nor skill for puppeteering. Life was unbearable for the boy because of how his father would force his son into learning the craft, berating and demoralizing Haruhiko when showing no interest. Much like his mother, Haruhiko despised the lifestyle as an entertainer, having no friends, having to go from school to school, traveling from city to city, all because of his father's delusional idea that eventually his performance will pay off. Too foolish to see that he was just wasting his life away on a ridiculous dream. Too blind to see that he was dragging his family down with him. It hit hard for Haruhiko when he met Kanuko, a girl he met at one of the schools he went to. Immediately, she had also taken a liking to this boy, curious about the shy boy in his life as a traveling puppeteer. Probably the best thing in Haruhiko's miserable life was being friends with this girl, and the most painful experience when learning the hard way that all good things ended much quicker for Haruhiko when his family had to move again. And even though it made Haruhiko smile when seeing Kanuko shout her promises that they were going to meet again in the future, it was a promise that Haruhiko never believed in, knowing that the odds of that happening were very, very small because of how he was confined to his father's obsession. Then there was Yukihiko, the eldest son who had easily developed his skills as a puppeteer. And yet, he too had an inner hatred for his father because of the years he'd been without friends or having a chance to settle down. Since he began using Jean-Pierre, his favorite puppet, Yukihiko had grown up as a skilled puppeteer. But unlike his father, Yukihiko never shared the same passion nor dream. Yukihiko saw his father as nothing more but a man who was consumed by a fantasy, a fool who couldn't see that he was literally wasting his life away, too blind to see how his eldest son was secretly wishing that one day something will happen, like his father getting sick, so the family can finally stop moving and settle down. And well, one day, that wish came true when his father became fatally ill and was forced to live in this broken-down apartment. The old man was slowly dying, and yet he still had the hopes of a full recovery before going back out on the road again. Yukihiko had been doing this puppeteering gig for so many years, since his father was performing at a theater. The truth is, Yukihiko despised his father and his speeches of how the puppets express heart and soul through the actions of the puppeteer, like an extension of the arm or something. But all Yukihiko saw was an old fool who never realized that it was him who was being controlled by the puppets. How else can anybody live like this, having to move from town to town, thriving off a chump change with 3 children? The man was not all there. There was no way that Yukihiko wanted to live out his life like that. as a puppet's puppet. And so the following day, that was when Yukihiko ran away. After Yukihiko left, his father still clinged on to the hopes that he was going to make a full recovery and be back on the road again with his remaining children. However, the old man had never made that full recovery and passed away a year and a half later. After the loss of their father, Haruhiko and Natsumi ended up staying at a cousin's house until Haruhiko graduated from school, find himself a steady job at a factory, so that he and his sister were able to move into a cheap apartment. It wasn't long after that when Haruhiko would find himself surprised when running into a familiar face. Why, it was Kanuko, the girl from 5th grade who promised that one day they would meet up again. And I guess it was by fate that these two were meant for each other, which is why they quickly became very close friends. But our story is about to take a very interesting turn for our two siblings, when someone else from Haruhiko's struggling past will also find a way back into his life again when receiving a strange letter in the mail. It was from his brother Yukihiko, who has not only found himself with a family, a career as a successful businessman or something like that, had built himself a house, and this whole time he's been living in the same city, just a few blocks away from Kanuko's place. 7 years. Haruhiko was amazed that his brother did pretty well for himself when looking at the massive home. Unbelievable that he literally built this house. And after being led into the front yard, Haruhiko was once again surprised when being greeted by another familiar face. Why, it was Jean-Pierre, his brother's puppet. This whole time, he still kept the creepy thing. An unnecessary and bizarre way to introduce his brother, using a puppet. The interior of the house was amazing. Everything was immaculate. But Haruhiko quickly found the house a bit weird when noticing how Jean-Pierre's strings were coming from the spaces in the ceiling. Assuming that his brother was up there controlling the puppet, which Haruhiko found to be very confusing, seeing how this whole time he assumed that his brother would despise puppeteering. But when Haruhiko and Natsumi would finally be greeted by Yukihiko and his family, let's just say that Haruhiko had no expectations, nor was prepared to see what had become of his brother, when noticing that Yukihiko, his wife and son, were floating from the ground because of the strings that were attached to them, coming from the ceiling. It was like Haruhiko and Natsumi were being greeted by a family of life-size puppets. So, as to what happened to Yukihiko since running away, is quite a story. You see, at first, things were kind of scary seeing how Yukihiko had nothing but the spare change in his pocket in Jean-Pierre. But developing a talent of making impressions of famous people, it wasn't long before Yukihiko had found himself making some money. And well, since then, it was all nothing but luck from there. Of course, there were some tough times, but his family, this house, his business and wealth would have never happened if it wasn't for his puppet Jean-Pierre. Yukihiko owes everything to that puppet. But Haruhiko kind of found it unsettling how his brother was vague with details, like what kind of business he was running when saying that he was his own boss, and not fully explaining how he owes everything to his puppet, and dining upon a buffet of the finest foods, while watching a performance of life-size ballerina puppets dancing around the dining room. Immediately, Natsumi fell in love with the scenery. Haruhiko, however, wasn't as amazed as his little sister. In fact, he was feeling a bit uncomfortable with something, more like concern, when noticing Yukihiko's son dancing with the ballerinas. This whole time, the child was asleep, and yet here he is, lifeless, being forced to dine and dance. Not sure what to make of all this. Respectfully trying to avoid an awkward conversation, but Haruhiko believed that there was something not right about this. which is why he had to ask his brother about the strings, if he's being controlled by someone in the ceiling. A predictable and anticipated curiosity, and it took Haruhiko this long to get around to it. Yes, of course Yukihiko and his family are being controlled with piano wire and by a group of puppeteers who are under his employ. And even though they cannot be seen, there are many of them hiding away in the attic. There are about 5 of them who are controlling Yukihiko. You see, when this house was built, it was specifically built for this unique lifestyle, meaning that there are spaces within the ceiling of the first and second roof for the puppeteers to do their thing. And when Haruhiko expressed his curiosity, while trying to avoid coming off as disrespectful, he had to know why his brother and his family would go through all the trouble when they can just move on their own. Why take away the ability to move freely? But Yukihiko knew that his brother would have a hard time understanding. It's not what it looks like, being controlled by other people. No, not at all. Not one time has Yukihiko felt inconvenient nor uncomfortable. In fact, he's not only relaxed, but able to move at his own free will, having more control over his body than he had ever imagined. It's like what Yukihiko said before running away, about his father. It's the puppeteers who are the ones that are being controlled. Except in this house, it's the puppets who are the true puppet masters. A dream. That's how Haruhiko could best describe his reunion experience with his brother. Natsumi, however, did not really have the same dreaming vibe as her brother did when visiting that house. Even though Natsumi found it kind of weird when seeing Yukihiko and his family float around the house and stuff, overall Natsumi felt that her older brother was living in some fairy tale, especially when seeing those ballerinas. But that's what it was for Haruhiko. A dream. A bizarre one that was not only challenging Haruhiko's touch with reality, but was hiding something very terrible. Problem is, he just couldn't quite figure it out. But with Natsumi's fascination with her brother's lifestyle, along with Yukihiko and his wife insisting for them to visit any time they like, reluctantly, Haruhiko and Natsumi became frequent visitors on the weekends. Sure, every family is different. It shouldn't be uncommon if people have interests that are bizarre, and that's what Haruhiko tried telling himself when visiting his brother. And yet, unlike Natsumi, he still couldn't shake away the feeling that there was something terribly wrong with his brother's fascination of being strung up. Even when Yukihiko had the ballerina dancers act out as if they were attracted to his brother, it was like Yukihiko was a little too much into this puppet thing. And Haruhiko wasn't appreciating the fact that he was being pressured by his brother into playing along. How and why Yukihiko turned out like this was not only an uncomfortable mystery for Haruhiko, but a very concerning one when his sister wanted to know the experience of dancing around as a ballerina puppet. Going against Haruhiko's concerns, Tatsumi was drawn into the fantasy of her brother's bizarre lifestyle. Obviously, Yukihiko and his family was more than happy to let Tatsumi give the strings a try, but Haruhiko just didn't like the feeling of his brother insisting him to be strung up as well. Like he was completely disregarding Haruhiko's feelings over the whole thing. Just could not see how somebody would find it comfortable or enjoyable when having other people control your every move. And as Haruhiko waited for his sister to be set up in the other room, a perfect moment for Haruhiko to have himself a private word with his brother and come forward with his concerns about this whole puppet thing. You see, what really bothered Haruhiko was when his brother would mention how he and his family are like this all hours of the day. And that is true. There is not a moment where Yukihiko or his family would detach themselves to go out every once in a while, not even during private moments such as rest or even using the restroom. In fact, Yukihiko has been like this since the house was built, which was about 2 years ago. Since then, he never left the house, didn't need to, really. And of course, it's normal to have concerning thoughts about the absence of privacy and damaging side effects of not using the muscles, causing them to atrophy. And once again, with his vague details, Yukihiko promised that once you're strung up, there's no need to worry about things like that. When Tatsumi got outfitted and strung up as a ballerina puppet, Yukihiko wanted to show his brother a demonstration, the experience of being the puppet. You see, once you and your muscles are fully relaxed, you surrender your entire body and put your faith into the hands of the puppeteers. That is when you begin to feel the flowing movement run through you, doing much more with your body than you had without strings. Without being strung up, Tatsumi's dreams of dancing like a ballerina is nothing more but a mere dream. Watching the girl give in and perform like a world-class ballerina, you can clearly see how her dreams can become a reality. In no time, Natsumi will have full control of her body and movement. But for Haruhiko, this was no dream. He still can't shake away the idea that there's nothing normal about this. It's weird, and it's wrong, which is why he demanded for Natsumi to immediately take off the strings. There's just no way he can see his sister fall into this kind of warped madness, but the experience of being strung up was so enlightening for Natsumi. For once in her miserable life, Natsumi truly felt the comforts of moving so freely. If her brother would just stop being so damn difficult, and at least give it a try, he'll see how truly enjoyable it is when experiencing something like this. To move and dance like the puppet was just so incredible that Yukihiko was more than happy to let his sister live here when she asked to stay, having no intent of taking off the strings. And even though Yukihiko had given Haruhiko the same offering, along with the spared bedroom, for obvious reasons, Haruhiko declined. There is no expression as to what Haruhiko is going through. To see what became of his brother. Seeing his sister giving in to Yukihiko's warped lifestyle. After everything his father put him through, Haruhiko never thought it would go this far. Seeing his brother become a man who's more consumed than his father, as if it was a family curse or something. And this was not only a personal struggle for Haruhiko, but a growing issue for his girlfriend Kunuko. To this day, Haruhiko never shared anything about his visits with Yukihiko, his bizarre lifestyle, nor any of the personal issues that were weighing him down. It was just something that he could not bring himself to talk about. A severe lack of communication that had the young woman fearing for the worst, that Haruhiko may have found love with another woman. And when Kunuko decided to spend a day following Haruhiko to his brother's house, her meddling was about to uncover a horror that is far greater than the unfaithful act of a lover. You see, what she does not know is that behind the walls of this magnificent house isn't just a young man who's struggling to find a way to free his sister and brother from a lifestyle that's not only weird, but unhealthy and dangerous. This house has a dwelling evil that has a taste for Haruhiko, to seduce the young man into trying out the strings, to feel its comforting love, his heart and soul for the rewards of experiencing absolute freedom and bliss. Of course, regardless of how many times Haruhiko's brother, or these unseen people who are controlling the puppets, try convincing him to experience the life of being strung up. That's just not happening. The idea of these life-size ballerina dolls taking him into some room upstairs and try convincing him to wear the strings was now at a point where this puppet thing was starting to get amusing and ridiculous. And watching her boyfriend from the outside, with what it seems like another woman, that was when the fury of a scorned lover would suddenly disrupt everything, when Kunuko decided to storm right into the property of this house, with the intent of giving Haruhiko a piece of her mind. But instead, she would be stopped at the front door by Jean-Pierre, that creepy puppet, greeting an uninvited guest. That was when the fantasy came to a sudden halt, and the world within his home had become a nightmare. A bizarre fantasy had suddenly turned into a frenzied terror when the dolls began moving and shaking violently, especially when one of them would try and attack Haruhiko. Not knowing what was going on, Haruhiko was finally fed up with his brother's twisted fantasy when his puppeteers tried harming him with one of the dolls. But Haruhiko's assumption of a sick joke was about to turn into an unremitting horror when going downstairs to confront Yukihiko. Much like the dolls upstairs, Yukihiko, his family, and even Natsumi was also shaking around violently. Hearing the panic within their voices, his brother's expression of absolute terror when fully realizing that he was no longer in control, forced into accepting the reality of the consequences of his twisted paradise, that this feeling of absolute freedom was but a mere illusion. His brother, screaming for Jean-Pierre to save him from this nightmare. Not knowing why Yukihiko was screaming for his favorite puppet, Haruhiko was still trying to keep his foot on reality. Whatever was happening to his family is because of the puppeteers in the ceiling. So gathering enough furniture to stack onto the dining room table, just enough to reach the ceiling and climb through the spaces, Haruhiko was not prepared for what was dwelling within the ceiling this whole time. Oh yes, there was people hiding away in the ceiling, puppeteers controlling his family. But when noticing the expressions on their faces when trying to get them to stop controlling his family, what Haruhiko saw when looking into the eyes of one of these men, he will never forget the blank, empty stare. When one of the puppeteers kicked Haruhiko out of the ceiling, resulting with a painful landing, Haruhiko was without any options to save his family from this nightmare, until noticing his brother still screaming for his puppet to help him, and Jean-Pierre watching the scene from the doorway before disappearing. Jean-Pierre, the creepy puppet fleeing from the curious Haruhiko, who's roughly figuring it all out. And Haruhiko was about to face another unexpected nightmare when Jean-Pierre would lead him to the bloody remains of his girlfriend, Kunuko. It was like Jean-Pierre wanted Haruhiko to present his newest creation, a lifeless flesh puppet that's now strung up and decorated with several stab wounds. Not knowing why Kunuko would end up at his brother's house, and why Jean-Pierre would do something like this. But I guess Haruhiko had never understood what was really pulling the strings all along. So maybe Haruhiko can't be enticed with the blissful rewards of being strung up, which of course is not an issue for Jean-Pierre. Alive or dead, it wouldn't matter. Haruhiko would make a great addition to his house of puppets. But Jean-Pierre's attempt of killing Haruhiko with a knife went unsuccessful when Haruhiko grabbed the doll and smashed it into the ground and wall. That one moment where Haruhiko vented out all his inner rage on this puppet, the hatred for something that had consumed the lives of his family. And after Jean-Pierre was nothing more but wooden pieces, that was when the curse was lifted and the nightmare was finally over. What had happened within that household was a tragedy that will never be fully known. For years, this household had been under the spell of an evil. Not knowing how many years Yukihiko had been under the influence of Jean-Pierre, nor how far back this evil goes, there's even the possibility that even his own father may have been under the influence of this evil, which may be doubtful. Whatever happened in this house, a lot of lives were under the control of this evil. All those years, those people in the ceiling had lost their lives to Jean-Pierre's magic. which may have been controlling everything, giving Yukihiko the delusional belief that it was he who was the one in control, even though it had taken Tatsumi some time to move and walk again. I guess after the years of being strung up and having their strings pulled by an evil, Yukihiko and his family were no longer human. They were just a family of puppets. Kinda makes you wonder though, that if you put your heart and soul into something, could it be possible that you may be putting more than you should? Bringing life into something that is consuming yours, and having a developing taste for more?